Always hearing about the next big earthquake, and now scientists are warning that areas around the San Andreas Fault could see a strong earthquake as soon as this year.
We are always hearing about the next big earthquake, and now scientists are warning that areas around the San Andreas Fault could see a strong earthquake as soon as this year. San Francisco recently experienced a sequence of earthquakes near the San Francisco Zoo, highlighting the seismic activity along this section of the San Andreas Fault. The first, a magnitude 3.5 earthquake, occurred at 23:02 local time, UTC+8, on January 10, 2025, at a depth of 7.9 kilometers. Its epicenter was located approximately 5 kilometers northwest of the zoo, and its tremors were felt across the northern peninsula with intensity varying depending on local geology. Shortly after, at 23:36, a second earthquake with a magnitude of 2.2 struck the same general area, this time at a depth of 8.0 kilometers. This smaller tremor may have gone unnoticed by some, but it served as a further indicator of seismic activity in the region. Hours later, at 2:48 on January 11, a magnitude 2.9 earthquake occurred at a depth of 8.1 kilometers, just slightly north of the earlier events. These earthquakes unfolded within a compact area centered around the complex fault system shaping the Bay Area. The proximity in time and location of these earthquakes raises questions about their connection and potential implications. While the events are relatively minor compared to the catastrophic potential of the San Andreas Fault, they serve as reminders of the region's dynamic geological processes. Residents reported different experiences of the tremors, with those on firmer ground often describing a sharp jolt, while those in softer, more unstable soils felt prolonged shaking. For those who inhabit or study the Bay Area, understanding the recurrence intervals of earthquakes and the fault's behavior is crucial. Paragraph 2. The San Andreas is known for its vast potential energy release, which has historically shaped the region's geography and urban resilience. This evolving situation underscores the need for preparedness in a region where the Earth's movements are an intrinsic part of life. The size and length of a fault play a crucial role in determining the magnitude of an earthquake it can produce. In the case of the San Andreas Fault, it is estimated that it could generate an earthquake up to a magnitude 8, though likely not much beyond that. Larger magnitudes, such as 8.5 or 9, are typically associated with subduction zones where immense tectonic plates collide and descend beneath one another. The recent magnitude 3.5 earthquake, while modest in comparison, was strong enough to be felt by many in San Francisco. The city's unique geological features, characterized by its rolling hills underpinned by bedrock and areas of unconsolidated fill, amplify the complexity of how tremors are experienced. The unconsolidated fill, particularly in regions that have been extended or reclaimed near the coast, consists largely of marine sediments. With foundations built atop these areas, they are prone to more pronounced shaking compared to those on firmer ground as seismic energy tends to amplify and linger in such loose materials. Paragraph 3. Despite its relatively small size, this earthquake, originating along the extensive San Andreas Fault, managed to spread its effects across a broader area than a similar quake on a smaller fault. The nature of the San Andreas allows seismic energy to propagate efficiently along its length, with tremors radiating outward. Reports of shaking extended from the peninsula into the Santa Cruz Mountains and even as far as Santa Cruz itself. The energy also traveled into the estuary systems, reaching parts of the Sacramento Delta, though the most concentrated effects were felt near the epicenter. The geological materials underlying certain areas, particularly layers of loose sediments, are far less compact than solid rock. This difference allows seismic energy to propagate more freely, often resulting in more intense shaking. The recent earthquake, centered directly on the San Andreas Fault near San Francisco, condensed most of its energy in this area where the geological conditions amplify its effects. Paragraph 4. Historical seismic activity in the region provides valuable context. A map of all earthquakes of magnitude 3.5 and greater from 2000 to the present reveals a consistent pattern of minor tremors within the Bay Area. Over the past 25 years, there have been numerous earthquakes, but none of substantial magnitude. Both the San Andreas Fault and the nearby Hayward Fault remain highly stressed, leaving seismologists, geophysicists, and geologists concerned about the potential for a significant event. These faults traverse densely populated regions, making the stakes particularly high. The seismic hazard in the Bay Area is among the highest in the United States. Maps of earthquake risk confirm that much of the region is susceptible to strong shaking. However, when focusing specifically on the San Andreas Fault, only for earthquakes of magnitude 3.5 or greater have been recorded in the last 2 decades. These include a magnitude 3.5 in 2019, a magnitude 3.6 in 2002, and a magnitude 3.7 in 2007. 2023 witnessed noteworthy seismic events. However, these occurrences transpired slightly off the fault itself. The earthquake in 2025 stands out as both the largest magnitude tremor directly on this segment of the San Andreas in over 20 years and as an important reminder of the fault's potential. This recent event highlights the ongoing seismic tension in the region and the importance of preparedness for the communities living along this active fault line. The geological setting of a location plays a critical role in determining the intensity and duration of shaking during an earthquake. Areas built on solid bedrock, such as hard rock formations, often experience shorter, sharper jolts with less intensity. In contrast, regions with loosely compacted sediments or soil tend to amplify seismic waves, resulting in prolonged shaking and increased severity. On the San Francisco Peninsula, this variation is evident in the measured shear wave velocity of the upper 30 meters, approximately 100 feet, of the subsurface. These velocities provide a key metric known as the VS30, which is used to classify a site's response to seismic activity. For example, areas with higher VS30 values, such as 926, 136, or 760 meters per second, typically correspond to bedrock or more compact geological formations. Such locations offer a greater degree of stability during an earthquake, making them suitable for construction with less intensive engineering requirements. Shear wave velocity is closely linked to the behavior of surface waves, which are responsible for approximately 70% of an earthquake's destructive energy. Higher shear wave velocities are associated with less destructive interactions, providing critical insights into how surface waves will propagate through different zones. This information is essential for assessing potential earthquake hazards and ensuring buildings are designed to withstand the expected forces. In San Francisco, certain areas are fortunate to sit atop bedrock formations, including serpentine rock, which provides a robust foundation for construction. These locations can mitigate the impacts of seismic waves, offering a natural advantage for stability. However, understanding the diverse geological conditions across the peninsula remains vital for preparing for potential earthquake events and safeguarding the region's infrastructure and inhabitants. Certain areas with lower shear wave velocities highlight the varying seismic responses across the San Francisco Peninsula. For instance, some zones exhibit values such as 460 or 380 meters per second. But closer to the coast, these figures drop further, with readings of 337 or even as low as 291 meters per second near the shoreline. The ground consists of sand and loosely compacted sediments, significantly reducing shear wave velocity. In some coastal areas, values reach as low as 191 and even 178 meters per second, classified as Site Class E, indicating high susceptibility to intense shaking during an earthquake. Such areas contrast sharply with locations underpinned by bedrock, which offer far greater stability. The shaking experienced in these lower velocity zones would be more prolonged and severe compared to areas with higher values, such as the bedrock zones described earlier. Expanding the view to the Greater Bay Area, the pattern becomes clear. Oakland and much of the East Bay, for example, generally feature lower shear wave velocities, with firmer ground only found in the hills or along the coastal ranges. In the Santa Cruz Mountains, where the San Andreas Fault runs directly through, higher shear wave velocities are more common. Here, an earthquake would likely produce a sharper, more abrupt jolt rather than prolonged shaking. In contrast, the San Jose region shows significantly lower average shear wave velocities within the upper 30 meters of subsurface materials. These areas, characterized by soft soils, hold lesser site classifications and would likely endure more severe shaking if a major earthquake were to strike. The magnitude 3.5 earthquake recently recorded raises questions: was this a singular event, or could it signal a precursor to something larger? Historical data provides insights. The San Andreas Fault, running from central California through the Bay Area into northern California, is a major seismic feature. As it continues toward Ferndale, its history of earthquake recurrence intervals suggests the potential for significant activity in the future. Preparedness in regions with varying geological conditions remains critical as the dynamics of this iconic fault line continue to shape the landscape and lives of those in its vicinity. On the 5th of December, the text abruptly ends here. In 2024, a magnitude 7.0 earthquake struck this region, marking one of the most significant seismic events in recent history. This occurrence highlights ongoing large-scale activity along the San Andreas Fault in modern times. However, such powerful quakes are relatively infrequent, reflecting the fault's recurrence intervals. The San Andreas Fault, which bisects the Bay Area, exhibits varying recurrence intervals along its length. The infamous 1906 earthquake, a monumental event, aligns with the estimated 200 to 300-year recurrence period for this northern segment of the fault. Moving southward toward Santa Cruz, the intervals shorten to approximately 110 years. The closer one approaches areas where the fault changes direction, the recurrence intervals generally lengthen, demonstrating a complex temporal pattern. Southern California segment of the San Andreas, by contrast, follows its own distinct recurrent cycle. The Bay Area's seismic landscape is further complicated by other faults, including the Hayward Fault and the Napa Creek Fault. The Napa Creek Fault gained attention with a magnitude 6.0 earthquake in 2014, a stark reminder of its potential. Meanwhile, the Hayward Fault, which produced a major earthquake in 1868, has an estimated recurrence interval of 170 years. Geological studies of past fault movement suggest that the region is nearing the average interval for a significant quake on this fault. It's essential to remember that these recurrence intervals represent averages. Earthquakes don't adhere strictly to these timelines. There can be extended periods of quiet or clusters of activity. Nevertheless, the general picture for the region's major faults shows cycles exceeding a century, with many now approaching or surpassing their expected thresholds. The Bay Area's tectonic setting remains primed for seismic activity, underlining the importance of ongoing vigilance and preparedness. The Bay Area exhibits varied earthquake recurrence intervals, ranging from approximately 110 years in the south to 200 to 300 years further north. San Francisco, positioned toward the northern end of the San Andreas Fault, is now approaching the later stages of its estimated recurrence range. The recent magnitude 3.5 earthquake carries a statistical likelihood of 5 to 10% of being a foreshock according to official figures. Should it precede a larger event, the increase would likely be by about 1 magnitude, potentially reaching 4.5 or at most a magnitude 5. While such an event would still be considered relatively weak, the impact could nonetheless be noticeable. In contrast, earthquakes of magnitude 6, such as the 2014 Napa event, are when seismic activity begins to cause significant damage. This underscores the importance of monitoring activity, particularly along key faults in the Bay Area. Besides the San Andreas Fault, notable faults include the Calaveras Fault and the Hayward Fault, each with its own seismic behavior. Additionally, regions like the Geysers experience frequent smaller earthquakes, adding to the area's dynamic tectonic landscape. The recent magnitude 3.5 earthquake off the coast of San Francisco is particularly noteworthy as it marks the first significant seismic activity on this segment of the San Andreas Fault in over 2 decades. While not indicative of immediate danger, it serves as a reminder of the fault's potential and the ongoing need for preparedness in this geologically active region. The story of the Bay Area's seismicity continues to unfold, shaped by the forces beneath its surface. Now let's check the latest earthquake updates from around the world. Monday evening, the 20th of January, 2025, seismic activity was recorded in the Seattle area, Washington. The most recent event, a magnitude 3.0 earthquake, struck the eastern side of the Seattle fault zone earlier in the day. The same region experienced a magnitude 3.5 quake, suggesting a minor swarm of seismic events in this area. This activity has raised concern as the Seattle fault zone has the potential to produce a major earthquake, possibly reaching a magnitude of 7.5. What makes this fault particularly worrisome is its location directly beneath Seattle's downtown area. Historical records and geological studies have shown that the Seattle fault zone is a significant seismic risk. While the past 30 days have seen limited activity with only 3 minor earthquakes on the western edge of the fault, the magnitude of the recent events is notable. These quakes are the strongest observed in this zone over the past month. Information provided by Seattle's Emergency Management Services highlights the unique threat posed by the Seattle fault. An earthquake originating here would have a far greater impact on the city compared to a more distant event, such as one on the Cascadia subduction zone located roughly 100 miles west of Seattle. Although the Cascadia subduction zone is capable of generating massive earthquakes and tsunamis, its relative distance means the effects on Seattle would likely be less severe than a direct rupture beneath the city. Comparatively, the situation is similar to the Newport-Inglewood Fault in Los Angeles, which runs beneath urban areas, as opposed to the more distant San Andreas Fault. The potential for a 7.5 magnitude earthquake beneath Seattle is based on the fault's capacity to store strain over time. While a magnitude 7.0 is considered more likely, the possibility of a larger event increases depending on the amount of strain accumulated since the fault's last major rupture. The most recent major earthquake on the Seattle fault occurred approximately 1,100 years ago, leaving a considerable span of time since its last significant rupture. Despite the fault's relatively slow slip rate, the long interval raises the likelihood that another event could be approaching. Historical records and geological studies indicate the fault has been active 3 to 4 times within the past 3,000 years. Based on this pattern, if one assumes the lower estimate of 3 earthquakes, this suggests an average recurrence of roughly 1,000 years. With 1,100 years having passed, the area may now be edging closer to another significant seismic event. While no large earthquakes have occurred recently, such data underscores the importance of not becoming complacent. Ignoring the gradual increase in seismic activity could leave the region unprepared for the next major event. The Seattle fault poses a significant hazard due to its proximity to densely populated areas. Unlike faults further offshore such as the Cascadia subduction zone, an earthquake here would deliver direct and potentially catastrophic impacts to Seattle and its surroundings. The uncertainty surrounding the fault's exact recurrence interval only adds to the urgency for vigilance and preparedness. As geological records suggest that significant strain may be nearing a critical point, when reviewing the statement regarding the Seattle fault's activity, it becomes evident that the fault is overdue for a major earthquake. With the fault having been active 3 to 4 times over the past 3,000 years, the current time period is dangerously close to another large event. The recent uptick in seismic activity, including a 3.5 magnitude earthquake, serves as a clear reminder that the fault remains very much alive. This was felt across various parts of the Seattle area, including Redmond and Tacoma. While a 3.5 quake is not particularly powerful on its own, it adds to the growing body of evidence that the fault is not dormant. Similar activity has been observed in the past few years, reinforcing the idea that the region remains at risk. The situation is not unique to Seattle, as earthquake activity is increasing across many parts of the world, particularly in areas like the Nankai Trough, Taiwan, and Japan. A notable 6.0 earthquake struck Taiwan today, alongside additional smaller quakes. Just after this, further seismic activity was recorded near the Japan Trench and the northern Mariana Islands. These events appear to be part of a larger pattern of pressure transfer within the Earth's crust. Of the potential for much larger seismic events. While smaller quakes like these offer a glimpse into the region's seismic activity, they also highlight the ongoing buildup of pressure along the fault line. It's a reminder to stay informed, prepared, and vigilant as we continue to monitor the movements beneath our feet. The question isn't if the big one will hit, it's when. Stay tuned, stay safe, and don't forget